I'm Rachel.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome back to Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
This week, we'll be talking about how appropriators in Congress are the hardest working. After that, we'll talk about our lives on the Hill.
Welcome back. It was another crazy week on the Hill. There was a lot of things that happened last week, and I really think that the funniest thing that happened, which I don't think was pretty funny for House Republican leadership, was that one of their bills failed on the floor. And people might be thinking, oh, it was a bill that was really partisan. It was a bill that, was never going to fly with the fiscal conservatives or the hardliners. It was literally a labor bill that flew under the radar.
I mean, though, if you think about it, obviously we see Congress very differently.
Yeah.
Right before, we knew the margins are so slim. We've talked about how they have a razor slim margin, the slimmest in history. On some days it's 1, on some days it's 2. And then on days where there's bad attendance, it's none. On Tuesday last week, that was none. On a lot of days last week, that was none. And I remember we talked about this, about certain voting series, and we were like, even partisan bills that should pass easily with almost every Republican, maybe losing a handful, should pass. But whenever there's a no vote margin, that labor bill, I mean, if leadership really did look at it and look at some pro-labor moderates or people in competitive districts, I think that the whip should have known that it was going to fail.
That's a key sentence that you just said, is that the whip would have known. There was a lot of House Republicans who spoke to reporters being like, the whip team just didn't do their job. They didn't whip the votes because they didn't think they had to. And I think that when a lot of us reporters are running around being like, who are these 10 that are voting against this bill? We were confused by it because it was half hardliners, half moderates. And we were like, what is going on? Like, why is this bill failing? I was the only one in the press gallery waiting for this bill to go because I was waiting for something else. All of a sudden, every reporter I've ever met was suddenly in the gallery looking because we were like, why is this bill failing? And then we started asking members afterwards, like, why did you vote against it? Like, why didn't you like it? And even though it was like there are slim margins, 9 or 8 Republicans, which is way more than the margin that they ever have.
Even if they had full attendance.
Right. So that was a pretty big rebellion over something that pretty much flew under the radar.
Yeah.
But I think Republicans often forget that there is a good chunk of their members who fit in a lot of different boxes. There's some who are hardliner conservatives, but then there's also some who are very populist. And then there's some who are very pro-labor. And if you, like you mentioned, in those swing districts, this was a bill that I think once again reminded Mike Johnson and House Republican leadership that your swing districts matter.
Yeah.
And if you don't cater to them and you don't check in on them and you just assume that they're always going to be there and voting yes for your bills, last week was a very clear message, like you can't take anything for granted.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like they've showed that time and time again these in recent months. We saw it with ACA specifically. I mean, all of this has been in January, and these people in moderate districts, I think that I've heard a lot of concern from Republicans going into the 2026 midterms. If you're looking at polling, if you're looking at different races leaning certain ways, these Republicans in swing districts have really, really, really tough races. And if they are not showing that pushback to the speaker, then they're not going to win. They're not going to have stuff to go back to their districts during all of these recess weeks to campaign on. And I mean, a lot of times they are known to fold and give into leadership because, I mean, people are not following the labor bill on the floor. I mean, I'm sure some people are, but people are not following that day to day.
It's not like the main thing on people's minds right now.
But when there is a 2-seat majority and they have tough seats, going back to their district and campaigning on those things is so important to them.
And I think that also those types of bills can fly under the radar when there's bigger things happening. And so everybody was focused like last week on appropriations. Appropriations is my entire life now, and I just feel like I never talk about anything else. But last week there was a minibus, which basically was just 2 bills smashed together into one package. And it was pretty bipartisan, easy bills.
Yeah.
Nobody really thought that it was going to be a problem to pass it. And in the end, it wasn't. It passed bipartisan, whatever, it was good. But the problem with it is that everyone was so prepared for appropriations. They were so concerned about what was happening with Homeland Security because that easy package that they voted on last week was supposed to include funding for Homeland Security. And that didn't happen because Democrats are trying to figure out how to respond to the shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis. And so there's arguments over, do we defund ICE? Do we hold up the bill? Do we go into a shutdown? Like, there's a whole different things that they're trying to figure out. And so last week, that was kind of the main event. And then all of a sudden there was this bill that ultimately failed on the floor, and then they yanked 2 others, which I haven't seen Republican leaders yank bills off the floor since the blueprint for reconciliation.
I was about to say, whenever they hold votes, yeah.
And so that was just something that was really interesting to me, and I think it kind of reminded reporters too that every bill now has to be on watch. Because even if it's a bill that you think that everyone's going to vote for, maybe on party lines, or you think that all Republicans is just an easy yes and we're done in 5 minutes, that is not always going to be the case. And I think heading into the 2026 midterms, it really shows that the House this year is going to be very complex and very complicated, and it's going to give a lot of headaches to Republicans.
And I mean, it's going to require a very heavy lift from the whip team in Emmer's office. I mean, whenever you have a 2-seat majority, it doesn't matter if it is a very strong partisan bill. You don't have votes to lose. You cannot afford to not whip a single bill. Like every single bill, regardless of if it's partisan, if it's bipartisan, if it's should have no problems or bumps, you have to whip every single bill, because there could be one person that doesn't like one provision in the bill and they vote against it, and then the bill's done.
I think of like the House of Cards. I don't know if anybody's seen that. I also have started watching that show years after it came out. I'm always like that. So I'm behind everyone, I'm sure. But in that show, they show the whip at the time using like magnets and quite literally moving from the yes to the maybe to the no column and back and forth. And like that is something that is incredibly precarious. Like you have to make sure that that person that you move to the yes column is absolutely on lock. And there's been a lot of Republicans who have talked to me about that. They're like, when there was a 20-seat majority, it was easy. Like if you could go into it thinking that you might have 5 people that go against it, and you might get surprised, and it might be 10 people who go against it. But in the end, you're like, who cares, because we passed. And it doesn't matter. And we passed it with a 10-seat buffer or whatever. But right now, it's like, you maybe have a 2-seat majority on a good day. You need to go in there knowing that, well, you want to go in there, I guess, on the Republican side, hoping that there's no one who's voting against it. But as we've talked about a lot, like, Thomas Massie is almost always a no on most bills. And so, like, he's already won. Some days, that's it. That's all you got. It's just him. And so I think that with appropriations coming up for this week, you know, it's the biggest package and it's the most contentious. It's defense, it's transportation, it's labor, health, and human services, and then we also have Homeland Security floating around. And so what Republicans are going to have to do is get these bills over to the Senate, who are on recess this week. So that also doesn't really help that they're gone. And then next week, the House is scheduled to be on recess. But that, we don't know if they're going to keep that or not. TBD. Because
I would like that.
I would love it. I would love to have recess, but also it is kind of funny because these members, like, they'll tweet. So one of the members tweeted, I think it was Eli Crane from Arizona. He tweeted that, like, about the Shower Act, which was this random bill, and he was like, I need a shower to get away from this horrible place, like, it's disgusting. And it is kind of funny because, like, everyone's been gone for Christmas break. They come back for 2 weeks, arguably have the worst 2 weeks of their lives.
Literally, like, hit the ground running. I honestly came back from the holidays feeling pretty refreshed and ready to get back into it. And these 2 weeks have felt like the longest 2 weeks ever. Like, it is just constant. And I feel like both of us are covering 2 totally different sectors of the House, and we still can't cover it all.
No, we can't cover it all, and that's why we're a 2-woman show, and we're pretty good. But it is hard. Things fall through the cracks, and so I think that that's also something that we have to be aware of, is having to be hyper aware of what each member's priorities are, because you see it with appropriations. You see the rules on the floor failing, and then you go and find that member, or almost failing, and you find that member afterwards who ended up flipping, and you're like, well, what was your priority? Why did you decide to vote against it? Why did you decide to flip? Like, you have to track down all these members and get all of their thoughts, and sometimes it can be easy as, well, I don't like a provision in the bill. Okay, fine. Some of them are like, well, I'm mad about something that happened 2 weeks ago. Or in the case of last week, there was rumors that Representative Luna was upset at Representative Hinson for something that happened during McCarthy's time. Like, these grudges can last forever. So on top of covering legislation and appropriations and the normal drama, then we also have to keep up with, like, the little petty things that are going on in between members. And it kind of is a headache sometimes. So I think people want recess.
It's like keeping up with your friends. Like, you want to know your friends' like favorite cake to get for their birthdays, or their favorite coffee to get for their birthdays, stuff like that. But it's kind of like, you have to remember, oh, why they like this on healthcare, or why they like this on labor. And so you have to remember these things so that you think of them, and you, like with the labor bill, it makes sense. Some of the people, once they voted no, at first glance, it's like, why is this bill failing? And then you look at who voted for it, and you kind of remember their priorities, or look at some of their prior tweets about like pro-labor laws or stuff like that, and you're like, wait, that, like, even
Totally
the whips
makes
team
sense now.
could have seen that coming if they looked at it in that tedious way in which we often also miss.
And I think that that's why this week for appropriations is going to be very key, because last week showed that they can lose members whenever. So they're going to need to go in and they're going to have to figure out, okay, do we have the votes? Do we have the votes for all of these contentious bills? Because the rule is going to be really important. Democrats are still on this train of they want to have restrictions on ICE. And so how that impacts the rule this week and this procedural measure is going to be key, because no Democrat is going to vote for the rule. They rarely do. And so that's going to be something that I think hardliner Republicans are once again going to be in the spotlight. I don't know if moderates will necessarily be in the game this week as they were last week, but
Totally.
it's something to watch. And, we're getting closer away from a shutdown. As of last week, the House has passed 8 of the 12 appropriations bills.
2/3.
So that's really great. Hasn't happened in a very long time, years.
Since Biden.
Yeah, so it'll be key this week to see if they can get it all done. But if not, they're going to have to cancel that recess, and you're going to have a lot of angry members and a lot of angry reporters. But
Yes.
I talked to Tom Cole last week, and he said, well, people who are upset that we're coming down to the wire again, we did have a 43-day shutdown. And he was like, we could have gotten all of this done during those 43 days. And he did place the blame on the Democrats, which that has been a pretty party line blame game.
I mean, they've been saying that since October 1st.
So that wasn't a shock that he said that, but he did make a good point that appropriators are the most bipartisan committee. And
Totally.
so for the shutdown, he was like, we could have worked together. We could have worked together. We could have gotten it. He never blames his Democratic colleagues on the appropriations committee for anything
Very
that happens.
rare. I was talking to members last week about this. They've been so consistent. Ranking member Rosa DeLauro and Chairman Tom Cole are the most consistent committee counterparts that are on completely separate ideological spectrums. I think they work so well together, because even in a heated moment, even in a moment where they don't see eye to eye or they are getting nowhere that they want, they only say good things about each other and only say good things about the appropriations process. And I think that it really reflects on their leadership. I mean, it kind of is a parallel to people doing affirmations. Like, people who do affirmations have positive outcomes or have a better day. They are only saying positive things about each other and about the process that they work on. And I think that is a direct reflection of, one, them being some of the hardest workers in Congress, and two, being some of the only people to get stuff done.
Speaking of getting stuff done, last week also, and this is something that I think is one of those topics that we always talk about that people outside of DC are closely following because it's something that's so widespread, is stock trading. And so stock trading had a pretty big development last week. You've been covering that a lot. And I feel like I was running around doing appropriations. So not only for viewers and listeners, but also for me, what is happening with stock trading? And this upcoming week, what's the likelihood of any movement on that?
Yeah. So for the past years, but I'm going to talk specifically on this Congress because it's what I've been really focused on. But stock trade ban has been a very bipartisan issue. One of the most, I would say, bipartisan issues. Because
Other than approps.
Not even, there are people who feel so passionately and then people who feel so passionately against it on both sides. It really doesn't fall on either political ideology spectrum.
Yeah, AOC and Roy are on the same team.
Yes.
That never happens.
And then, Marjorie Taylor Greene has been known for trading stocks, and same as Nancy Pelosi. Those are two big names that are on very different sides that would probably, they've said that they support the issue to an extent. We've seen Pelosi kind of change her stance on that. But it's a hard vote for leadership. You look at a member like Rob Bresnahan, who is in a competitive district and has had some stock trade stuff come out about him. It's hard for House leadership to put a stock trade ban on the floor. The Republican, or maybe not Republican argument, but the Republican argument in the committee hearing markup this week was that they don't have to divest the stocks that they own, and they can continue owning, they just cannot buy new ones with insider information they have. A lot of the argument pro keeping stocks for people in Congress is that if you have to divest, a lot of people do corporate stocks as their retirement. And so they're like, I'm not going to run for Congress if I have to divest my entire retirement fund of these stocks, which is understandable. But then also it's you have a lot of insider knowledge that you get from being in Congress and being in briefings. And if you're using that to make money, that's also a problem. And so, in the hearing, there was arguments. This bill essentially just stops stock trading for the member, their direct dependents, and their spouse.
And how is it different from the bills before, because one of the biggest things that was kind of interesting about this, kind of like I said with AOC and Roy, is that there's been so many stock trading bills that come out, and a lot of them are really complex, but there are a ton that have large bipartisan support. But for some reason, this particular bill that came out, and it was led by Brian Steele from the House Administration Committee, sort of. What is the difference in this one that makes Democrats not love it as much as maybe the other ones that like AOC and Seth Magaziner have been really pressing for?
Magaziner's bill includes the president and vice president in
That would do it.
their bill. Obviously, I think that I was in a gaggle with the ranking member, and a reporter asked, why, if you add the vice president and president in this bill, that's going to be more incentive for Trump to veto it. And so why pass a bill that gets vetoed? And he's like, we can't not put that in just because we're afraid of President Trump vetoing it. And so that's a really big argument. There's some arguments that dependents can help or give input on other people's trading, which is a pretty big non-starter for a lot of Democrats on this issue. But Chairman Steele also argued that this is a basic framework that is really one of the only frameworks that is going to have a possibility of crossing the finish line. I think it puts Democrats in a really tough spot because this is something that they've fought for so long. And to put them on record, I think that most people, when they are hearing about a stock trade ban or hearing about a stock trade vote, they look who votes against it and they don't necessarily know the framework of the actual bill itself. And so I think it is going to be hard if this bill hits the floor next week and they do take a record vote on it, and Democrats are going to have to vote against it because, it's something they've been fighting for, and most people don't understand the intricacies of the framework or that it doesn't include the president and vice president as much as they can say that,
Yeah, and I think it's another one of those bills where if you're not paying attention, like, you wouldn't understand why your member is voting against it. And so when a bill like this comes up, Democrats have kind of been caught in the hot seat with a lot of these, is that it comes to the floor and you're seeing a large majority of Democrats vote against it. And you're like, oh, like, Democrats are against banning stocks.
Yes.
Or they're against banning this, or they're against, like, supporting Israel whenever that was, a huge thing, and still kind of is. Like, but when you get into the framework and the details of the bill and then you get into it, a lot of members will be like, I loved 90% of the bill, but this 10% I couldn't agree with, and because of that it was so large I voted no. But a lot of people, probably people who watch our show and listen to it, and other people who are just kind of looking at DC from the outside in, only see you voted no against this bill and this bill did this broadly.
Yes.
So you must, not be doing what we sent you to do. And that can be hard for Republicans heading into midterms where they're defending their majority, but also for Democrats who are on the up. But, they're not just on the up, like, they're on the up very on quicksand, like any wrong move and they can fall back down.
And Republicans are great at messaging the basics. Republicans can put out an ad as soon as that stock trade bill hits the floor and just slam every vulnerable Democrat being like, this member voted against the stock trade ban. And that is such a big issue for the American public. And I think that is one messaging tactic that Republicans are good at, is messaging the basics without getting into the nitty gritties. They don't really explain, they just message what they think works and what people will understand, and it's what they've been good at. But we will be following that and all of the appropriations.
Everything else.
Well, welcome, Congressman, to Capitol Conversations.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I see you guys in the hallway all the time and we do a lot of interviews, but now I'm on the podcast. This is so exciting.
It's so fun. We're so happy to have you. And yeah, I think just that's one of the best parts that Lauren and I talk about this job, is just being able to see people in the hallway and just like build relationships with you members, and you guys get to build relationships with us. So it's so great that you get to be on here. And it's great that people are hearing about our show. We always love that feedback. So one of the first questions that I've just been burning to ask is ACA, healthcare. That's been like Democrats' biggest thing. And you guys seem to have kind of won on that messaging front. And especially in a time when the midterms are going to be happening and you guys really need to have a message here to flip the House. Like, that's super important. What do you think Democrats have done well about messaging healthcare, and how can that carry into the 2026 midterms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what has gone really well when it comes to healthcare is just a very simple message of trying to lower the cost of healthcare. I think as a party, we have focused a lot on coverage, and rightfully so. I think a lot of us, almost all of us, feel like everyone should be covered and have the ability to get affordable health care. But we haven't done enough sometimes when it comes to addressing the cost of care. And the ACA tax credits directly affect costs for a lot of people. Even if you're not getting the ACA tax credits or a beneficiary of them, you still benefit from the fact that more people will be covered. They'll at a lower cost, and they'll be able to go to their appointments and have that quality of care. And then the hospitals won't have to charge more for other people coming because they're getting paid for almost everyone that they're seeing. And so I think that we've been doing a good job when it comes to costs. And I'd like to do more when it comes to costs because the tax credits are great, but they're kind of a short-term fix. They were meant to be a short-term fix. And long-term, we need to figure out what we're going to do with this healthcare system because all along the supply chain, things are just overpriced and it's getting even more expensive. Medical equipment is more expensive. Prescription drugs are more expensive. And so something needs to be done long-term when it comes to costs and being able to deliver care.
And speaking
Going
of
off
that,
of that,
oh, sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
I was going to say, keeping it going with 2026 campaigning, we actually went to high school at like the high schools next to each other, which is crazy. We talked about you being from Clear Lake, me being from
Yeah.
Friendswood. That's a very conservative area. It is represented by Republicans. How does growing up around Republicans and Republican-led districts that are vastly voting for Trump affect the way that you campaign and the way that you kind of legislate? Because obviously you represent a Democratic area now. So how does that kind of translate into campaigning, especially in a midterm that's like so crucial like this?
Yeah, I remember in elementary school, I went to elementary school in Clear Lake, and I was campaigning for Bill Clinton, and everyone else was for Bob Dole in 1996.
Mhm.
And I think I was the only person to vote for Bill Clinton in that. It was like 25 to 1, and everyone knew who the one was. I was like the one Democrat in elementary school. But my dad was a Republican, is not as much anymore, but was a Republican most of his life, and my mom was a Democrat, so we had it in our house too. And I think just finding the common ground, seeing and understanding where the other side is coming from, what pressures they face too from their constituents. I think that's the best way to really try to get things done in a bipartisan way too. And so it's really easy to just say the other side is stupid, the other side doesn't understand things, or they're just evil. But when you try to get to know people on a personal level, as well as come from a background where most of your friends and family were Republican, you start to try to understand their values and how they apply it to politics.
Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about the relationships you've built in Congress? I think a lot of people, and we've talked to a lot of different members, Republican and Democrats, so we kind of love this question for everybody. Like how do you go about building relationships with Republicans? Because a lot of people see things on the news, see things on TV and think that everybody just hates each other. And that's true for like 20 people. But like how would you describe your relationship with your Republican colleagues and why it's important to have those friendships?
Yeah, I think if you keep the door open, people will walk through it. So if you're kind to people and try to be nice with them and try to socialize with them, you can build a relationship with them. I mean, it's tough sometimes because I'll see my Republican colleagues say things publicly that really deeply affect my constituents and certainly are probably hurtful to them. But what I learned in the state legislature is you shouldn't have permanent friends or permanent enemies. You just try to go issue to issue. You try to find a place where you can work with them. Like right now, I'm trying. I've been actually on the Republican side of the chamber a lot this week, trying to talk to folks on the ag committee about some of my priorities in my rural counties and for farmers there. And they've been very receptive and talkative and giving me advice. And so if you're just you try to be kind to people, you can get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah, I think that another thing that has been fun with you in Congress is your social media presence. I think that you've had multiple viral videos. You really do a good job at following trends, but in a way that is susceptible to people. I think that sometimes it's hard to make some members of Congress that are 80 do some like trending now on social media. What's that been like using trends to reach people and reach younger voters?
Yeah, I think part of it is, well, I have a great staff, first of all, comes up with great ideas, and then they'll not say no to my ideas, even however goofy they are. We'll
Yeah.
just try them anyway. And so that's part of it, is just having that sort of, culture in the office of being willing to do things. Part of it is also, this is a pretty hard job. There's a lot of negativity. I try to lighten it up, and I try to, bring people who don't want to pay attention to politics because it's so negative, or they don't care about politics. I try to bring them in and educate them on what's going on in sort of a more appealing, funny way sometimes. And so and it's just good for my own personal mental health sometimes to be able to just try to have fun with this sometimes. But these are tough issues, right? And so certainly we want to bring attention to them, which the funny videos and memes help. And then we also just want to try to keep things lighthearted sometimes instead of all angry speeches.
And so we're kind of in the last legs of January, which is kind of crazy. I feel like 2026 just started, and there's a lot still left on the docket. Congress has to pass appropriations bills. There's, as we talked about earlier, healthcare. The House figured it out, but now the Senate is in negotiations and they are gone. They're going to be on recess, and there's no deal quite yet. What is Democrats' message to the Senate to get moving on that healthcare ACA deal that's likely to come back to the House, that the House is going to have to take up again? What are Democrats hoping to see come out of these negotiations, especially when it comes to ACA?
Yeah, I've actually spoken to a couple senators who are part of a bipartisan group working together. I don't think they call them gangs anymore. They call them groups, so groups of seven or whatever it's called. But I think we've been clear that 1 year is not acceptable. We need more than 1 year, for instance. I've been clear at least. I think I want to make sure that we preserve a lot of what was in the 3 year extension, what we passed in the House. We want the 3 years. And so, again, I think there's no reason to raise costs on people's healthcare premiums. Things are already costly enough. And then 2 or 3 years will give us enough time to address the other issues when it comes to the cost of care, and also some of the systemic issues in the sort of healthcare marketplace and healthcare industry that are keeping these costs so high. Some of them are just the reality of providing care. Some of them really are sort of anti-consumer policies, or just price gouging. And so we need to find where those things are and try to address them. But I think 2 years gives us the time, with 3 years being ideal.
And when it comes to appropriations, right now there's a lot of Democratic concern about ICE and DHS and immigration just in general, and the policies of the Trump administration. And we're heading now closer and closer to that January 30th funding deadline. And this is going to be the week where it's kind of all hands on deck, because it's the last of the appropriations bills. They need to get to the yes vote, get to the Senate, to the president. Can you talk a little bit about like what Democrats' strategy is for DHS and ICE, and how that's wrapping into appropriations and potentially on a vote this week?
Yeah, it's just like last time. I certainly don't want to shut down. I know my constituents don't. We had constituents taking out shutdown loans from banks. I'm glad that the financial institutions stepped up, but that was really hard. And so, I'll just say from the outset, I don't want to shut down or anything close to it. What I would like to see, though, is an acknowledgement, at least by both sides, that what's going on right now at DHS is not acceptable. Even if you feel strongly that we need to do aggressive immigration enforcement, this is too far. And the funding DHS like a military, I think, is not going to be something the American people want long term. And so we have to make sure. I mean, I also threw up a no vote yesterday on the State Department funding bill and the OMB funding bill for a similar reason. I just we're cutting USAID essentially, and there's sort of no response. So what are we doing about it? So normally I want to be good government, and I want to support these bills. There's a lot of good things in some of these bills. I know a lot of Democrats voted for the one yesterday, but it's hard to treat these as normal times. Certainly my constituents don't think these are normal times, and we have to at least ask for better and demand better of some of these funding bills.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and we will see you soon.
Sounds good.
Welcome to our Q&A section, our favorite part. And our question is from Kylie this week. And she asks, when is Congress going to do something big again?
Great question. Not anytime soon. It is
Not
a
anytime soon.
midterm year. It is so easy, like we have talked about time and time again, to message anything big that is done against anyone and hurt any race in November. So anything during campaign season is essentially off limits for passing any big piece of legislation. Say you do a big budget bill, people are going to slam that bill and people are going to be unhappy with it. A lot of major pieces of legislation are extremely unpopular at first because they are massive pieces of legislation kind of changing the norm, and it is so easy to hurt a campaign off of even a minor piece of legislation, much less a large piece of legislation.
And members don't want to take politically difficult votes ever, especially with all these like narrow margins, but especially in a midterm year. Like they don't want to do that. And the stock trading thing is a big example. That might be the biggest thing that happens this year. And I think another thing that people are looking at is, you know, Trump was marketing this big, beautiful bill. Everyone knows about it in some capacity, working families tax cut, however you want to name it. But Republicans are already hoping to do a second one, and they released framework last week. It was the Republican Study Committee, which is kind of a pretty large caucus of Republicans.
Really large.
And they come from all different sides of the spectrum. I wouldn't say they are moderates, but they're definitely not super hardline. They're somewhere in the middle. They're probably just your traditional Republican before like Trump came in and changed like the different levels of ideological
They're
spectrum.
on the same wavelength as leadership.
Yeah.
It's where you have to meet people at all aspects of the caucus. You can't really float one way or the other.
No, and so they released this framework, and it's focused on affordability, so things like healthcare and housing and such. And when I was talking to leadership about it, House Republican leadership, Majority Leader Scalise was like, look, we have a 1-vote margin. We're going to take a look at it, but also he was very candid about it.
Realistic.
He was like, he tempered expectations. He was like, we have so many different thoughts and people and ideas that it was so hard to get it done the first time. It is going to be incredibly difficult to do it this second time. Leader Thune over in the Senate was a bit more candid. He was like, we can't just put a bill on the floor unless there's a purpose. We're not just going to put one on there just to do it. And like, the Republicans, actually, what I thought was kind of interesting was in their framework, they wrote like, well, Democrats successfully passed 2 of their 3 reconciliation attempts, so Republicans need to do this too. And I was like, that is such a crazy argument to put there, but it's true. Democrats took advantage of the trifecta when they had it. They were able to push this reconciliation bill that they had twice, and they accomplished that. And then, you know, the House flipped Republican, and then now we're here with Trump, and they have a trifecta. So trifectas do this, but in a midterm year and the years after, usually the trifecta does not last. And so then you're in a gridlock. And so if we see Democrats take the House, Democrats currently kind of have a pathway to the Senate.
I was about to say, the Senate is not out of play. I would
And it
say
used to
it's
be.
more
It
in
used to
play
be than
that's a whole nother episode that we could do. I know we are not technically Senate reporters, but I
No.
am extremely fascinated at Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's ability to get candidates he wants to run, and that is exactly how he has put the Senate in play, which is wild. If you would have asked us a year ago,
I would have said no chance. But the fact that he was able to recruit so many people, and then also Republicans kind of shooting themselves in the foot repeatedly, whether it's at the Trump level or in the Congress level, you know, I think it'll make elections very interesting. But if people are sitting around waiting for another big bill, I think people can take a little bit of a sigh of relief, in my professional opinion. I don't think that
agree.
it's going to happen this year. And I mean, Johnson said we're going to have one last fall and this spring, and that certainly didn't happen. So don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And as always, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok and whatever platform you choose. And always read at WashingtonExaminer.com.